Obviously you've seen the Siberia videos, that was a bit extreme. This is a bit more like the weather we normally get in winter in the UK. So let's get the car cleared off and go for a bit of a drive in this. Start with, just get a soft brush, brush all the snow off your windows and anywhere that it's going to drop off. So if you have a thick coating on the roof, better off clearing it off. Next job, get in and start the car because we want it to be warming up from the inside. So I'll put the temperature gauges on a reasonably warm temperature, and then we've got a full screen demist there and the rear demister. We'll just put that on while we clear the windows. I'm going to use a jug of water. So this is just above room temperature, nothing more than that. There's no danger of it cracking your windscreen like a lot of people think. The important thing is we put it on and then use the wipers to clear the water off so it's not refreezing. Plenty on the wipers themselves. Give it a wipe, and that means it's not refreezing. Don't forget your side windows. These are frosted over. So windows are clear, we've got a good view out. So when you're in standing snow, this is the only time I would advise you switch your traction control off, and we're literally just going to switch it off until we're moving and then switch it back on again. As soon as we're onto the wet roads, we want the advantage of having traction control, stability control in place. So just clear the back window. And the other thing is, keep your revs down quite low when you're trying to set off. That way we're discouraging any wheel spin, and we're just getting the car moving, a little bit of momentum. So as soon as we're out on the road where it's wet, I'm going to switch the traction control back on again. So a few things to note about driving in the snow in this country. We don't really like it. We don't get on with the snow very well. We're not geared up for it, to be honest. The biggest difference when we went to the cold country earlier on this year, when we went to Siberia, was that everybody runs on winter tyres and everybody's prepared for a really cold winter every year. This year it's fairly rare that we get any snow. This is the second week in December. Quite unusual for us to get any depth of snow at this time of year. And people just don't know how to drive properly in it, so let's just go through the basics. First thing is that we salt the roads in this country. Now salt is very good if it's used properly. It's a combination of salt and grit that the local authorities put down, but the important thing is that it goes down before the snow, because it needs to mix with moisture to form a saline solution, a salt water solution. If it doesn't do that, the salt just sits on top of the snow and ice and it's no use. So it needs to be put down quite early, and it needs to mix into this salt water. Once it's mixed with the moisture, you get this saline solution, this wet look to the road, and all it's done is it's brought down the temperature at which the water will freeze. Now salt is okay, but it only works down to about -6 or -7 degrees. So if you look at your temperature gauge and you're in the -9s, -10s, if we get one of those really, really cold snaps, be very, very wary. Even if the salt's been put down, and even if it's spread nicely and it's mixed with the moisture, there is still a good chance that that moisture, that glistening that you see on the road surface, is going to be ice. So anything below about -6, -7 degrees, be very, very careful. So the biggest problem that we've got in this country with snow and ice is that people just don't use winter tyres. Now, I experienced proper winter tyres in Siberia for the first time, and I can't tell you what a difference they made. But in this country, we just don't tend to use them. So here's another trick in relation to driving in the snow in this country, and that is that momentum is your friend. So you'll see a lot of people absolutely crawling along 5 miles an hour because they think that's the safest speed to travel at. Actually, you need a little bit of momentum, particularly when it comes to uphill stretches. So if you can keep the car moving, the likelihood is that you'll retain some traction at the driven wheels. If you slow down or crawl down to a stop, the difficulty is getting going again. It's getting moving in these conditions that's the real problem. So this is a fairly typical winter snowy scene in the UK. The snow isn't completely covering the roads, but up the middle of the road surface there, hopefully you can see it, is a sort of band of slushy snow. So one of the problems that we've got is that we've got to be very careful with our positioning in these conditions. So I've talked a lot before about positioning the car for view and positioning for extending the radius of the turn and things like that. In these conditions, safety overrides all those considerations, and we want to stay where we've got the maximum grip with the wheels on the road surface, and that is obviously in the tyre tracks that everybody else has driven into the road. So if we allow our wheels to drive onto that strip of slush ice in the middle, I'll just put myself on it there. Well, we can drive through it, it's okay, but I'm immediately aware that the steering feels a little bit lighter, there's a little bit less control, and if I was to brake or try to steer, then I'd have real problems, because that's where we're going to get the real traction and grip problems. So you'll hear a lot of safety advice about driving in the snow and not going out and all this kind of stuff. I mean, to be fair, it is sensible. You've got to consider the purpose of your journey. You'll hear the AA and the RSC and the IAM coming out and saying don't travel unless it's absolutely necessary. But that depends on your definition of absolutely necessary, doesn't it? If I need to go to work on a Monday morning, then it's absolutely necessary that I get up and get out in these conditions. The problem is that everybody else is out in these conditions. A lot of people don't know how to drive in these conditions, so you end up getting a lot more congestion, particularly during the week. Now, the practicalities of driving in these conditions are, fundamentally we've got less grip between the tyres and the road surface, so we've got to take that into account when we're driving along. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, drive the car in a higher gear than normal. The idea of driving in a higher gear than normal is to make sure that less torque is going to the wheels. The more torque you've got going to the wheels, the more likely it is you will get some kind of wheel spin, or that you will lose traction with the driven wheels. So by putting the car in a higher gear, even if you're a bit ploddy with the accelerator, the likelihood is that less torque will go to the wheels, and there's less chance of you losing control through wheel spin. But actually, if you're careful with your right foot, if you're considerate, if you take into account that in the lower gears you'll have less grip and more torque going to the wheels, then you should easily be able to deal with these conditions, even in the lower gears. But you've got to be aware that you've got to have a much more sensitive touch on the accelerator pedal if you are going to drive in lower gears in these conditions. So here we've got somebody in front who's they're quite trundling along quite slowly in the Nissan Micra. So here's another thing that you've got to consider when we're following other vehicles in these conditions, our stopping distance. So your stopping distance can actually increase by up to 10 times when it's snowy and icy on the road. So inevitably any following position that you take behind another vehicle is going to have to be much longer. I'm going to take a lower gear now and have a look to see if we can get past this car. Well, if we just roll the acceleration on gently, it's not a problem. Checking the mirrors and coming in, so they don't have a very long following position on us. So there you can see, even though we've got a smattering of snow on the road and I'm on summer tyres, if we're very, very slow and considerate and controlled in our inputs, we can still drive reasonably normally. We've just taken a little bit off. We've smoothed the edges off and take a little bit off. So the other issue with your following position in these conditions is that it needs to be longer, because we've got to cope with the spray that's coming off other vehicles. Salt, wet roads, snow, ice, slush on the roads generally creates a higher level of spray on the road surface and from the tyres of the vehicle in front. So we need to drop back further to make sure that we maintain a good view of the road ahead. Looking up the road now, there's somebody crossing across to that recovery truck. Just checking the mirrors. Looking right up in the distance. Also got the bus moving along, but the bus is doing okay. So generally, if the bus is able to get through, I'm sure we'll be able to get through. Bus routes tend to be the main routes that are gritted and salted first. So chances are that this road's been reasonably well treated overnight. And looking up, I can see people stepping into the road, pedestrians on the near side. Remember about pedestrians as well, they don't salt the footpaths. Or if they do, it tends to sit on top of the snow. So there is a chance that we'll get pedestrians walking in the road when conditions are like that, like this. So bear that in mind. Now, a bit of local knowledge tells me there's a turning point for the buses just a little bit further up on the right, so I'm expecting everything to slow down a little bit around the next corner. And there we are. So all I'm doing is just easing off the gas. Now we're easing off the gas, obviously we're using the engine and the gearbox to slow the car down, but you've got to bear in mind a couple of things with that. Firstly, that you're only slowing the driven wheels of the car, in this case the rear wheels. Now again, if you do it nice and smoothly and controlled in these conditions, you'll have no problem at all. But you shouldn't necessarily avoid the brakes. Excuse me. The brakes in cars work on all four wheels, so in these conditions, sometimes you are much better off having all four brakes slowing the car rather than just using the engine and gearbox to slow the rear axle or the front axle, depending on which end of your car is driven. The other thing is as well, by using the engine and gearbox to slow the car down, we're not going to show brake lights to anybody who's following us. So we're going to be more considerate. We're going to keep a much longer following position than we are with the car in front. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody following us is going to do the same thing. So we want them to know that we're slowing down. So it may well be that I will touch the brakes and just show brake lights even if I'm not actually applying the brakes. So we can see on this stretch of road now we're higher up, we're up onto the moors. There's quite a bit more snow settled on the road itself. There are some tyre marks, etc. that have just developed along the road. It has been salted, you can see the brown of the salt coming through on the snow. But in these conditions, I certainly wouldn't consider moving out and overtaking anything else. So just felt a little bit of a slide going into that right-hander then. And this is where it's really important that we keep our stability systems switched on, because those systems are better than us. They have a layer of control much greater than we have the car, and they will recognise that the car is sliding more quickly than we will, even if you're a very experienced and skilled driver. And what those systems can do is cut the throttle and apply individual brakes. So if the car, for instance, starts to oversteer to the left as I go around this right-hander, the car can apply the inside right brake and bring the car back under control again. So even though we're taking all these things about weather into consideration, all the stuff we're talking about snow and ice, we're still driving in the same way as we would normally, looking right in the far distance. Our problem here is the Mini at the front. Slowed everything down. And look how close everybody's driving to each other here. Not the safest in these conditions. I'm just going to change down to third gear just to hold me back on this little downhill run. I'm also aware that there's a junction up ahead on the right. Some of these vehicles might slow down and turn off at that junction. So contrary to what a lot of people might tell you about driving in snow and ice. I've got the car in third gear now, but I'm being very, very gentle in the way that I apply the gas pedal, and in the way as well that I lift off the gas pedal, so we're not suddenly locking the rear axle. We're just gently bringing the foot off the gas pedal just to keep our speed where it is. The car at the front is choosing to drive at 30 miles an hour, so I want to hold back and not get too close to the car in front. Constantly keeping an eye on the mirrors as well. There's nothing behind us at the moment. So now here is where third gear is going to hold me back in that following position. So as you can see, I mean, there is a good covering of snow on the road surface here at the moment. The salt hasn't really mixed. I'm on summer tyres. I know that the rear tyres on this car were replaced a couple of thousand miles ago, so they're pretty much new. Plenty of tread. The front tyres, however, are probably down to about 3.5–4 millimeters of tread. They're not ready for changing yet, so I'm conscious there's a little bit less grip on the front axle than there is on the rear axle. Here I've let the cars in front get well ahead from me. I'm using third gear just to hold me gently on the hill, but I have still got a little bit of gas applied. The snow's starting to come down a little bit more than it was before. Because the snow's starting to come down, I'm switching my headlights from automatic to manual. So you've got to remember with automatic headlight setting is that it recognises the ambient light. That's how bright the sky is really. And at the moment the sky's pretty bright, but we've got a good snowfall, and in these conditions I would recommend having your dipped headlights on. Don't rely on your daytime running lights because they don't light your rear lamps up. But by switching to manual headlights, it means that I'm absolutely certain that those headlights are going to be on. Leave them in automatic. It's dead easy, isn't it? You put your headlights in automatic and you forget about it, but if it's foggy or if it's snowing like this or heavy rain and you want your dipped headlights on, the car won't automatically do that for you. It doesn't recognise the weather conditions, it only recognises the ambient light conditions. So looking well ahead into the distance now, there's a crest in the road. We're just dropping down in height a little bit, and height is crucial to how snow settles on the road. The higher you are, and really sometimes it can be in the tens of feet. Go up 60 or 70 feet higher and it can make all the difference between whether the snow is settling or whether it's whether the road remains damp. So in this case we're dropping downhill. I'm sure there's somebody up there on a bicycle. It must be certifiable riding a bicycle in these conditions, but we're going to have to be very, very careful passing that cyclist. He's not wearing any high vis either, he's just in dark clothing, but a little bit further down the road I'm almost certain that I saw a cyclist up ahead. So the danger for a cyclist is he's got virtually no grip going along here. So as and when we get to the point where we're passing that cyclist, we're going to have to give him plenty of room. I'm saying him, it's unlikely it's a female because women tend to be a bit more sensible than men. It's why they live longer than men. A woman wouldn't think to come out cycling in this weather, would she? Two cars in front, there's a car with his fog lights on. It's not foggy, people. You don't need your fog lights on in these conditions. Fog lights mask brake lights. And the car behind can get dazzled into just following those fog lights. Here he is, look at his wobbly line that he's leaving in the snow. So because of that I'm going to wait until I've got a very clear view past him, check the mirrors and move right out. Give him a full lane's width when we're passing him. Crackers. So down the bottom of the hill now, the road's bending to the right. Watch how those fog lights on the car 2 in front are masked. Sorry, watch how his brake lights are fogged by the fog lights. Is he braking? Is it foggy? It's not foggy. You only need your fog lights when visibility is down to less than 100 metres, and even then if you've got a car behind you and they can see you and you can see the headlights, turn your fog lights off because otherwise you're dazzling the car behind you. So I'm still maintaining third gear. It's just holding me back. Looking at the distance there, I've got a reduction in speed down to a 30. Where all these people are pressing the brakes, I haven't touched the brakes at all. I might have just squeezed them very gently on the approach to that cyclist, that's all. Just staying off the gas now as this car turns left. He could have made that easy for himself, but there you go. Some people stood at the back of a van down here, so I'm conscious that they may step into the road, either to get in the van or open the back. Just checking the mirrors. Switch on the rear demister. Your rear demister in most cars these days will also clear your side mirrors, heated mirrors, usually just on the one switch. When heated mirrors first came out, they used to have a separate switch down by the adjuster. Nowadays they tend to come on with the heated rear window. Useful to keep that heated rear window on in these conditions, because if you get any snow settling on it, it'll melt and you can just wipe it off with the rear wiper. So again, a bit of an uphill. This is where you need a bit of momentum. It's where the Mini isn't really helping us by holding back at 25-30 miles an hour in a 40 limit. Don't be afraid of getting the car moving. Just give yourself more time to stop and more distance to stop. Don't get too close to the vehicles in front. See how they're slowing down now? If we were to stop on this hill, we would have real problems getting going again. Again, I know these cars are all going to slow down unnecessarily really for this next left-hander, so I'm backing off early. Don't really want to be braking as we're going around the corner. It's the other thing about braking in these conditions. Try and do all your braking in a straight line. If we were to dab the brakes now, chances are we would end up probably understeering and potentially going into the opposite carriageway. We've got traffic coming towards. It's not what we want. So do all your braking in a straight line before the corners. So that's it for today. Just a few tips for driving in these British winter conditions. Not real winter conditions, not like we experienced earlier in the year in Siberia. But it just shows you that you can get out and you can drive if you need to. But have a good think about whether you actually need to go out in these conditions. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out the website, reglocal.com. Loads more information there about advanced and performance driving. For now, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.